started farming, we started having climate change, because we changed, and that was 10 to 12,000 years ago or more, depending on the anthropology and archaeology you read. So as we planted crops, biodiversity declined. As we improved grains, we split with nature, but food calories increased, as did our numbers. Think about gluten sensitivity these days, too, a gluten sensitivity, when you think about improved grains. Horse and ox domesticated 10,000 years ago was the beginning of civilization. Second carbon pool around 5,000 years ago. We cut down the forest to burn wood to purify ores. Of course, we had the Bronze and then the Iron Ages. And then remember, third carbon pool is coal. In the 1750s in England, the Industrial Revolution began for sure. Energy density in coal provided a quantum leap so that we could do more work. By 1859, the fourth pool of oil was found in western Pennsylvania. Liquid, it could easily be transported. It was energy dense. And now we say that some 40% of humanity could not be here without natural gas, the most important invention of the 20th century because of nitrogen-rich fertilizers. The next section, I'm leaving out several. I'm leaving out Faustian economics, and I'm leaving out life-affirming beauty. I've already discussed that slightly. But I'm going to the Global Ponzi Scheme by Lester Brown. Lester Brown, perhaps you know, founded the World Watch Institute in 1974. He's moved on now from there to the Earth Policy Institute. He says global demands on natural systems exceed their sustainable yield capacity by 30% in 2009. In 1950, we were living within our means, but by the 1980s, all of that changed. We need economists who think like ecologists. Otherwise, market behavior, including the indirect cost of goods and services or externalities, to value nature's services and to respect sustainable yield threshold, will cause the destruction of the economy's natural support systems, and our global Ponzi scheme will fall apart. So we need economists who think like ecologists. Okay, the next one, and I think we're really familiar with this, coal, the greatest threat to civilization. James Hansen, that we all know about Hansen, who's worked with climate change since the 1980s. Before that, but he got to on a public level, talking with Reagan and others from that time forward. At any rate, he says that we must, in fact, quit coal. It's a dead end, and I read that more and more now. And I also read that China is going to decommission 1,782 coal plants during this year. Just so you know that people are actually moving forward. And you remember Obama's talk about no more new, and we will start decommissioning the old. And it's been in the public's eye so much with the ash ponds and all of the pollution from the ash ponds moving on. Here's another one. We're probably very familiar with this, and I will try to make it, compacted a little bit. It's a Heinberg article, The View from Oil's Peak. What happens if policies to address peak oil are absent? 2005 Hirsch report forecast unprecedented social, economic, political impacts unless efforts undertaken for alternative fuels as a crash program. A 2% yearly decline was what was projected and hoped for. But how is the world responding? In 1998, policymakers had virtually no awareness of peak oil. Now there are peak oil groups in most governments, but their response is inefficient and ineffectual. What would be an effective response? Now this is something you hear in other parts of this book as well. In transportation, designing communities to reduce need for transportation, urban density and diversity, promote alternatives to private auto and air and truck freight, electrified options, alternative fuels, finally the more efficient fossil fuel transport options. In agriculture, maximize local production of food, promote forms of agriculture that rely on less fossil fuel input. And materials and chemicals, identify alternative materials from renewable sources, devise ways to reduce the amount of materials consumed. Carbon caps and trades, a dangerously misleading solution. Humanity's central task for coming decades is undue dependence on fossil fuels and to deal with resource depletion and climate change. I skip another. as you see this, and go to Alternative Energy Challenges by David Fridley, staff scientist at Lawrence Berkeley, the National Lab in California since 1995. For me, because we have alternative energy, our house is geothermal and we have solar, composting toilets, which, by the way, don't always work right. They've got bugs in them right now, just so you know. And what am I using to get rid of the bugs? Poison. And I wonder, we have spiders in our house right now, and I wondered if they've come because now we have that. And these are wonderfully high-tech composting toilets, but just so you know, should you ever want to indulge your complete carbon footprint being small, give you forewarned. So for me, this was the most enlightening because of problems with alternative energy that I was not familiar with. So alternative energy falls into two categories: substitutes for existing petroleum liquids and alternatives for storing and generating electric power. Okay, let that sink in a second. Some are green or clean, others as coal to liquid or tar sands are dirtier than what they're trying to replace. Fossil fuel requires extraction and transport to mobilize. Alternative energy depends on engineered equipment, infrastructure for capture and conversion, and it's very high-tech and it's fossil fuel dependent right now. So here are the challenges. One, scalability and timing. And this is the challenges of alternative energy. For AE, I'm going to say AE from now on, for AE to succeed, it must come in time, there must be the volume that is needed, and at a reasonable cost. Can small go to large, such as can algae-based diesel grow enough, fast enough to replace fossil fuel? Commercialization is another problem for AE. How far from breakthrough of invention to commercial use? That's usually 20 to 25 years. We're following a guy who does wind generators. We want a wind generator that we can put in the house so we don't have to build a tower. We don't want one of those giants. And he's been changing and changing and changing and getting money for it, and trying to have investors come in on it. And it's really taking a long time. The name of it, by the way, is Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. He's, I think, a German guy. Substitutability. Ideally, the AE form would be dropped into place of a fossil fuel, but that's rarely the case. In other words, an electric car, you have to retool the factory, you need large-scale batteries, there have to be recharging facilities, there have to be maintenance and spare parts, smart grid monitoring and control. So it's like a totally different mindset than what we have now with fossil fuels. Material input requirements. The key input isn't money so much as it is resources and energy. In other words, advanced technologies manufactured with rare earth elements. Who has the most rare earth elements? Anybody know? China. Yeah, right. Okay.
And they bought the plant in Indiana under, I think, Nixon's son-in-law, and they were not supposed to transfer the plant and its systems to China in the agreement, but they did. And within a few years. So that's an interesting little thing that's almost never brought up.
That's right, exactly. Okay, here's another one of the concerns for AE, intermittency. Electrons flow with a switch, gas flows with a pump. AE is only intermittent. When the sun shines, the wind blows, so storage is the key. We have these giant batteries for our solar, and they weigh over 100 pounds apiece. You could get even bigger ones, but we, being as practical as we are, decided, nope, we're going to have the size that we can actually move if we need to. And so we have one of those little carts that movers use, and we can move them should that be necessary. So that's the size of our storage batteries. Drawbacks, losses in storage and release, and limited energy density. Okay, talking about energy density, that's the next problem with AE. Amount of energy contained in a unit of energy form, low density, requires larger amounts to be used. And many of AE are low density, thus more resource consumption. And then I've already mentioned EROI, remember? Well, when oil was first being brought up, it was 100 to 1. In other words, 1 barrel of oil to bring up 100 barrels of oil. Now it's I want to be sure I have the right one. Now it is 20 to 1. And we've discovered that as an industrial society, we must have no more than 20% of our populace working to maintain industrial society. Is that going to be possible if we don't have 100 to 1 as the ROI of our energy source? AE needs to be the backbone for global transition from fossil fuels. The new system will not be a facsimile of today. We'll need to tap energy flows from sun, wind, and solar, and new manufacturing processes. Modern focus on centralized energy and distribution will have to change. And so one of the things that they're going to do at the end of this book is say we need distributed energy, more along the line of what Germany is doing. Every housetop, solar energy, solar panels. I only have 2 or 3 short ones to describe before Ilana does her segment. And I'll just kind of quickly tell them. One of them is When Risk Assessment is Risky by David Ehrenfield. And we employ risk assessment as it is. But it's a type of assessment where there are a lot of knowns. But if you take BP's catastrophe in the Gulf, there were a lot of things that were unknown. Just one of them was what's going to happen with dispersants, in the Gulf of Mexico. And no lab was as big as the Gulf of Mexico. And then there were all these different layers of hierarchy of who did what to whom and when. So that risk assessment, we're moving into a new idea of risk assessment. Do you remember James Woolsey? Perhaps a lot of you do. He was a national security and energy expert during two different Republican administrations. And he's categorized 2 different types of threats. One he calls malevolent and one he calls malignant. You could call this literacy, not so much energy literacy, but literacy about threats that come out of climate change. He called a malignant threat associated with collapse of complex systems, the electric grid, human body, Earth's climate, when unintentionally disturbed. He called malevolent threats to national security and the product of human choice, such as terrorists. Somewhere in this book I've read that we put out more money. No, I'm not going to say that because I can't remember all the part of it. That's why I don't tell jokes. Okay. Here's my last one, and then we'll pick up from there. Progress versus apocalypse. I thought this was interesting that this was included. John Michael Greer is a Grand Archdruid, and so I thought it was fascinating that he's included because of how he categorizes what is our mindset about climate change. And there are 2 completely different ones. He's written a lot on climate change and the topics that we're interested in, but it was the Archdruid that caught my attention. I enjoyed that. Here are 2 different sets of assumptions. One, technology will fix it, or catastrophic end of civilization. And so where are we going to go with our own mindset? I think we as a group with climate change have a much more positive mindset. But when you look at it, you can't be too boosterish with all the positive solutions either. You got to be as realistic as you possibly can. But what he suggests is that it will not be apocalyptic, and not a return to the Stone Age. We face a future of regress, not progress. Regress is an unthinkable concept today with our strong belief in the religion of progress. We will transition to the de-industrial age. But the myth we use to understand such a giant change will have an immense impact on the new world we create.
All right, so I'll jump in for part 3, which is discussing the landscape of energy. I recently read a statistic that only around 12% of U.S. adults are able to pass a basic energy literacy exam, which is kind of scary when you think about it, considering what a huge impact it has on our landscape, on our health, on our future. So the 2 sections that I'm discussing, parts 3 and 4, sort of deal with addressing the lack of education. So I'll give some basic knowledge about what energy resources are available and their net energy ratio, so how efficient they are. And then also dealing with a lot of the misinformation campaigns that are going on right now. There are a number of essays that go into addressing claims that industry advocates have been putting forth that aren't always accurate. The introduction essay for part 3 was written by David Murphy, who's a professor at North Illinois University. And he writes that the next decades will witness a global battle between geological depletion and technological advancement as modern society demands ever-increasing quantities of energy from an aging fossil fuel supply in a nascent renewable energy section. So here he cautions that transitioning into renewables will not solve all of our energy problems. We may be just swapping one dependency for another. Our global economy, as it now stands, is based upon unlimited growth and unrestrained growth. So this really depends on the uninterrupted flow of fuels every single day. Our non-renewable resources are constantly depleting, forcing us to find and successfully exploit new resources to meet our demand and our growing population. So going into the terminology, the net energy ratio calculates how much energy a resource provides versus how much energy is needed to produce or create it. And as I discussed with the top 10 energy sources, I'll be using that term as well as the key limiting factors, so sort of reasons why this form of energy may not be the most efficient. So he also mentions briefly that worldwide energy usage will not change significantly without energy efficiency efforts and conservation. So looking at the top 10 energy resources, we have coal, which has a net energy ratio of 80 to 1. So this is currently producing the most energy. The downside, as we all know, is that it's one of the worst polluters of all of the fossil fuels. And right now it's responsible for more than 40% of human-caused carbon emissions. For second place, we have hydropower and industrial wind, which both have a net energy ratio of 40 to 1, so significantly less than coal, but not as there are also potential areas of growth. So the key limiting factor of hydropower is that the best sites have already been developed. We've had hydropower for a significant amount of time. However, the mega dams that we've created have significantly destroyed our natural resources and displaced humans and animals, has a lower rate of pollution, but right now it only accounts for about 6% of U.S. energy generation. Industrial wind has a net energy ratio of 40 to 1, but it's intermittent. There aren't a ton of commercially viable sites all over the United States. It typically requires a backup energy source, and it also uses a large land footprint. Conventional oil has a net energy ratio of 30 to 1, but discoveries peaked in the 1960s and production has since declined. Now we've been turning to more energy intensive and extreme ways of extracting oil, as we've seen with the tar sands and shale oil rather. Right now worldwide we consume 30 billion barrels daily. So there's a huge impact on our environment. A little bit less efficient is biomass, which has a net energy ratio of 20 to 1. The key limiting factor is that large-scale development of this would put pressure on our forests and agricultural land. It can also cause air pollution, as burning wood and farm byproducts tends to emit a lot. We have solar photovoltaic, with a net energy ratio of 20 to 1. The key limiting factor for this source is that, again, it's intermittent. Not all areas of the world obviously have as much sunlight. It requires a backup energy source. Scalability might be also constrained due to dependence on scarce or expensive natural resources. Also, the net energy ratio of 20 to 1 is offshore drilling. As we've seen, this has a huge impact on our environment, often in extreme environments, and it requires a lot of technical complexity and requires a complicated pipeline system in order to take it from offshore into a commercially viable plant. We also have natural gas, the net energy ratio of 20 to 1. Although it has a higher energy density and produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions than coal or oil, it's very difficult to transport. And it's also used in such high quantities that it accounts for 20% of U.S. carbon dioxide emissions right now. We also have concentrated solar thermal, which has a net energy ratio of 18 to 1. But it requires heavy water usage, and again, it's very much reliant on having available solar. And then at number 10, we have nuclear energy, which only has a net energy ratio of 15 to 1. Right now, we have no good solution for how to deal with our radioactive waste. And right now, it's not economically viable without having government funding for it. Just under that, I almost wanted to add a number 11. I'll go ahead and throw it in here, is geothermal. Right now, the net energy ratio is only 12 to 1. It's a very small sector, and right now it's not economically viable, but it could be developed further. So that is summing up part 3. Part 4 was very difficult to summarize. I sort of had to go, as Lolly did, and sort of cherry pick some of the essays that I thought might be most interesting for the group today. So I chose to focus on drill baby drill, nuclear power and earth resources, also clean coal and bioenergy. So looking at false energy solutions. So in the introduction, they again talk about the importance of dissecting sort of the propaganda that's placed out by advocates from the industry. By dissecting the arguments advanced by boosters from various energy sources and policy, one gains the skills in recognizing ideas designed to serve a particular agenda, usually profit-oriented, of a narrow constituency. So the opinions in these following sections will inform one's judgment about whether a proposal offers legitimate progress towards a nature-friendly energy system, or if it's a false solution that continues or worsens the status quo. So the ideas presented in this section, such as drill more, develop clean coal, and burn biomass, often spread by politicians and industry groups. It's our job to study these proposals closely and to evaluate if the benefits outweigh the costs. So Drill Baby Drill was written by David Hughes, who's a geoscientist. He serves as a board member for the study of peak oil and gas Canada. And so just to give an introduction to it, global fossil fuel consumption has accelerated rapidly over the last few decades, requiring an enormous stream of resources to meet even current demand. Claims that future demand can be met simply by opening new areas to exploration and increasing production of relatively new resources like deepwater oil, tar sands, and shale oil ignore both the scale of global fossil fuel consumption and the technological challenges of producing such resources at a sufficient rate. So one of the things that I enjoyed about reading these various essays is that clearly they reflect the backgrounds of the authors. As a geoscientist, there were a lot of great statistics in this section, so I encourage you to go ahead and read it. I can only capture sort of a very small slice of it. But basically, the author wrote that oil is a very dense and convenient form of energy, and today fossil fuels provide 80% of the average citizen's energy usage. And it's allowed the average citizen's per capita consumption to increase ninefold since 1850. So as more energy has become available, this has increased our food and commodity production and also our population growth. Industrialized nations obviously consume the most energy. They make up 18% of the world's population and consume 4 times as much energy as non-developed countries. As the developing world wants to continue to develop, they are looking to increase their own energy use, as we've seen in China, which has increased its energy use by 134%. So it's had an explosive amount of growth. It's become a huge geopolitical issue, given that we are continuing to grow, but we don't have the capacity to meet our current energy demands as is. Fossil fuels that are easily extracted are our low-hanging fruit, and as it's been depleted, we've increasingly turned to oil that's harder to extract, has a huge financial cost for extraction, and a huge human cost. When we look at the net energy use to extract, it far outweighs the short-term fuel benefits, even when we factor in our technological advancements. So the Energy Information Agency in the United States forecasts future growth in energy consumption without considering limits on our supply. So it assumes that fossil fuel consumption will grow by 39% between 2010 and 2035, with a 27% increase in oil, 48% increase in gas, and 45% increase in coal. And this does not factor in that those resources might no longer be there in 2050. So the other section that I chose to focus on was nuclear power in the Earth. This was written by Richard Bell, who's an author, editor, and political consultant. He wrote Nuke Speak, which some of you might be familiar with. Nuke Speak, Nuclear Language, Myths, and Mindset. He's worked with the World Watch Institute. So he writes that nuclear power has gained renewed traction in recent years as the world's countries seek climate-friendly alternatives to fossil fuels. The public health risks, continuing dependence on public subsidies, and the seemingly intractable problem of nuclear waste storage makes nuclear power a core solution to our energy needs. So we've all seen disasters such as Fukushima and Chernobyl. And he attributes this basically to human hubris, the fact that we are arrogant enough to believe that we can control this technology, that this technology can be clean and easily accessed without building in the proper controls and systems to figure out how to manage disasters. There's this assumption that these disasters will not happen, and that's the fault and flaw in our current use of nuclear. Even back in 1957, the Brookhaven National Laboratory issued a report